I spent 20 years at war with my own mind, 20 years of just trying to make it through one more day. I lost track of how many times I thought about ending it all. At some point, I was convinced I was broken beyond repair. And honestly, I was angry at a mental health system that couldn't save me, no matter how many pills I swallowed or therapy appointments I sat through. Here's what most people don't realize. There's real science metabolic health, the tiny power plants inside our cells that can actually heal people who've been suffering for decades. This isn't wishful thinking, it's real. And if autism was only about genetics, why have rates quadrupled in the last 20 years? Something bigger is going on, and we can do something about it. But let me take you back. I grew up struggling with mental illness long before anyone noticed. No one diagnosed me. I just knew I was different, and I felt like an outcast. When I was 12, my world completely collapsed. My mom had what she called a nervous breakdown. It started with deep depression, then suicidal thoughts, and eventually full-blown psychosis. I watched doctors pump her full of meds that didn't help. I watched her lose everything custody of her 5 kids, all her money, and any sense of stability. And the system, it failed her. I didn't escape either. I left home before graduating high school, fell into years of depression, suicidal thoughts, OCD, and a mental health system that left me worse than before. My mom's story, her pain lit a fire in me, because I know there are millions of people out there just like her, maybe with different diagnoses, but the same pain, and they deserve better. So, if you've ever felt like life itself was suffocating you, or wondered if your family would be better off without you, this video is for you. For anyone battling severe depression, crippling anxiety, schizophrenia, or other serious mental health struggles, there's something you need to hear. If I could tell you one thing, it's this. If you've tried treatment after treatment and still feel stuck, please don't give up. There is hope. You can heal. You can get better when you finally understand the real science behind what's happening in your brain and body. I'm Chris Palmer, 38 years old, a tech marketing professional living in Seattle. On paper, my life looks good, a stable job, a decent apartment, smiling photos on social media. But behind all that, for nearly 3 decades, I was just trying to survive. As a kid, I was labeled too sensitive, lazy, difficult. No one knew I was actually living with undiagnosed ADHD and depression. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider. No one really understood me, and I had no explanation for why life felt so hard. In my 20s, I started what I thought would be the solution medication. One prescription after another, I kept hoping for relief. But the truth, I got heavier, 40 pounds heavier. My hands shook constantly, and I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I became a regular at the ER, sitting in those cold plastic chairs at 3 a.m., waiting for a doctor I didn't know to hand me another prescription. Every time a treatment failed, it felt like proof that I was broken, that I wasn't strong enough to get better. And then there was that night. The night I decided that ending it all would be the kindest thing I could do. Kind to my family, so they wouldn't have to worry about me anymore. Kind to myself, because waking up every day felt like torture. That was my rock bottom. But that moment, ironically, was also the start of everything changing. Because I started asking, why are millions of people like me stuck in the same cycle? Why isn't the system working? That question turned me from a desperate patient into a relentless researcher. I dove into the science, real science, not just self-help articles or feel-good books. I read clinical studies, medical journals, government reports. And what I found shocked me. In the largest depression treatment study in the US, over 4,000 patients, only 30% fully recovered after the first antidepressant. 70% were still depressed. Even after trying 4 different treatments, only about 35% met the standard for full recovery. For schizophrenia, In a study of 6,000 patients, only 4% achieved real recovery, a number that hasn't budged in over 50 years. These aren't just numbers, they're people. They were me. And they prove that what we're doing isn't enough. The mental health system isn't broken because doctors don't care. It's broken because we're missing something big. That something clicked for me when I started looking at metabolic health, how our cells turn food and oxygen into energy. The brain isn't separate from the body. When your body's metabolism is broken, your brain suffers too. And this isn't just about weight. Even thin people can have metabolic dysfunction at the cellular level. When brain cells can't make energy properly, they malfunction. That malfunction shows up as depression, anxiety, psychosis, addiction. This isn't weakness. It's not a moral failing. It's a sign your brain is in trouble. So now I'm not just telling my survival story, I'm telling it as someone who spent years studying this because I believe science can save lives. I'm living proof. That night, I lay on the cold floor of my Seattle apartment, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The hum of the fridge was the only sound in the room. I wasn't looking for hope. I'd run out of that a long time ago. I just wanted the voices in my head to quiet down for a while. I picked up my phone mindlessly, scrolling through podcasts, looking for anything to distract me. And then in the middle of that endless scrolling, I heard a voice say, "You're not broken. Your brain is an organ just like your heart or your liver, and organs can heal." I froze. It felt like the words cut straight through me. Nobody, no doctor, no therapist, not even the people who loved me had ever said that before. For years, I believed I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me as a person, and I would never get better. But what if my brain wasn't broken forever? What if it was just hurt, and hurt things can heal? That single thought cracked the wall I had built around myself. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night turned into hundreds of nights, me hunched over my laptop after long workdays reading neuroscience papers I barely understood at first. I wasn't studying for a degree, I was studying to survive. That's when I found something no psychiatrist had ever explained to me: mitochondria, tiny structures inside every cell. Back in high school, they were just the powerhouse of the cell, a trivia fact to pass a test. But now I realized they might hold the key to understanding why I'd been trapped in this darkness for so long. When mitochondria fail, your brain cells can't make enough energy to function. And when your brain runs out of energy, everything falls apart. Neurotransmitters go haywire. Hormones swing like a wrecking ball. The brain and body become inflamed. Even your gut health, the bacteria living inside you, starts feeding into anxiety and depression. This wasn't abstract science. It was my life written in biology. For years, I thought panic attacks were proof of weakness. But they weren't weakness. They were evidence my brain was doing exactly what it was designed to do: keep me alive. I grew up in a home where I never felt truly safe. My nervous system learned to live in survival mode. Cortisol pumped through my veins. My body was always on alert, always ready for danger, even when there wasn't any. Over time, that constant fight-or-flight state rewired me at a cellular level. My mitochondria stopped repairing themselves. My brain was running a marathon it could never finish, and eventually, it burned out. That's why I could be sitting alone in my living room, perfectly safe, and suddenly feel like I was dying. My body wasn't overreacting. It was stuck in survival mode, screaming at me to run, even when there was nothing to run from. That podcast didn't magically heal me, but it changed the question I was asking. I stopped wondering what's wrong with me and started asking, what happened to my brain and how can I help it heal? The deeper I dug, the more I realized there isn't a single depression gene or bipolar gene. Most mental illness risk factors point back to metabolism and mitochondrial health. Around 90% of your body's energy is produced in these little power plants. When they're damaged or overwhelmed, your brain simply doesn't have the energy it needs to function no matter how hard you try. That was the moment everything clicked. I wasn't weak. I wasn't broken. I was running on an empty tank. I'm not a scientist by training, I'm a marketing guy, but I became my own science experiment because no one else could explain why I was drowning. And now I share my story, not just as someone who survived, but as someone who's read the research, lived it, and pieced together a way forward. If you feel hopeless, if you've tried everything and still feel stuck, please know this: you're not beyond repair. Your brain isn't broken, and there's real science that can help you heal. I'm living proof. After months of staying up late buried in research papers and medical studies, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. But honestly, that scared me. Hope had let me down before every new medication, every new therapy promised relief, and every time I ended up right back in the same dark place. I couldn't handle another crash. So I told myself, if I'm going to try, I'm going to do it safely. The first step was talking to my doctor and therapist. I printed out some of the studies I'd been reading and sat in my doctor's office, hands shaking. I'm not trying to be reckless, I told her. I need to try something different, but I want to do it the right way. For the first time, I felt like she saw me not just as a struggling patient, but as someone ready to take control of his healing. Then I called my best friend, the one who'd seen me at rock bottom, and asked if he'd check in on me every day. Without hesitation, he said, "Of course, man. You're not doing this alone." That safety net, just knowing someone was watching out for me, gave me the courage to take the next step. I bought a cheap heart rate monitor and a notebook and started tracking everything: my sleep, my mood, my heart rate, my blood sugar, even my anxiety levels. At first it felt obsessive, but those numbers told me things I couldn't see in the mirror. They helped me understand my body in a way no one had ever explained before. I didn't throw out my meds. I didn't ditch therapy. This wasn't about being reckless. It was about becoming curious. I wanted to see myself as a scientist, would run experiments, measure, adjust. And one thing became clear right away: there's no one-size-fits-all plan. Healing wasn't going to be a magic pill or a quick fix. It was going to take patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to pay attention to the details. That was the moment I stopped being a passive patient and started being an active participant in my own recovery. I didn't flip a switch and turn my life around overnight. Honestly, the changes I made were small, almost embarrassingly simple, but they stacked up, and that's what mattered. The first thing I did was change what I ate. I cut out the soda, the pastries, the drive-through dinners. Instead, I started buying one-ingredient foods: eggs, beans, chicken breast, frozen veggies from Costco. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy, just real food. And with my doctor's supervision, I dipped my toes into a clean, low-carb, almost keto style of eating. For the first time, I was feeding my body instead of just numbing it. Then I worked on when I ate. A couple times a week, I'd push breakfast back and do a light fast, 12 to 14 hours. I expected to be jittery and anxious, but the opposite happened. My brain felt calmer. Sleep was huge. I let myself keep my morning coffee, but I cut caffeine after noon. And at night, I built this little ritual an hour before bed. No screens, no scrolling. Just me, a book, and dim lights. For years, I thought my body forgot how to rest. Turns out, it just needed an invitation. I added movement. Nothing extreme. I started walking around Green Lake every day for 30 minutes. That path became my therapy session, my church pew, my sanctuary. And a couple times a week, I picked up some light weights. Not to look good, just to feel strong again. For my head and heart, I kept a journal. 10 minutes a day dumping my thoughts on paper so they wouldn't eat me alive. I cut back on alcohol. I hit block on every toxic social media account that made me feel worse about myself. And I figured out how to do it all cheap. Brown rice beans, canned fish, cooking in bulk. Healing didn't have to drain my bank account. Now here's the part that blew my mind. If you tell most psychiatrists that diet could affect mental illness, 95% of them will laugh at you. I used to laugh at the idea too. But then I looked at over 100 years of research, brain scans, genetics, trauma studies, hormone data, and it all pointed to the same conclusion. Mental illness isn't just in your head, it's a metabolic disorder. When your mitochondria, those tiny power plants inside every cell, stop working right, your brain can't make enough energy. And when your brain is starved for energy, it shows up as depression, anxiety, OCD, panic attacks, all the things I lived with for decades. And here's what shook me the most. Food was one of the most powerful levers I had. Years ago, I was dealing with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, even prediabetes. I wasn't overweight, I exercised, I ate low fat like I was told. But most of my meals were processed crap because it was cheap. My health kept getting worse. Then just trying to fix my physical health, I went low carb. 3 months later, my metabolic syndrome was gone. But the real shock. My mental health improved in a way I'd never imagined. I woke up one morning actually happy, energized, confident. I didn't even recognize myself. It wasn't magic, it was metabolism. My mitochondria were finally getting the fuel they needed. And when you zoom out, the numbers are terrifying. Only 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy. 93% of us have at least one marker, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, prediabetes, belly fat, screaming that our metabolism is off. No wonder we're drowning in a mental health crisis. I didn't stop my meds overnight. I didn't throw out therapy. I just started making these small, steady choices, and little by little my brain began to heal. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building a life. Let me just say this straight, I'm not telling you to throw out your meds. I didn't. I'm not saying keto or intermittent fasting is some magic cure that'll fix everything. It's not. And I'm definitely not saying doctors are the enemy. Honestly, one of the smartest things I ever did was finally learn how to work with my doctors instead of hiding from them or fighting every suggestion they gave me. This journey, it's not about quick fixes or magic bullets. It's about building a solid foundation your brain can actually stand on. If you're a parent, here's something I wish someone had told me years ago. If you notice signs of autism, metabolic issues, or mental health struggles in your kids, early action can completely change their future. And often the first step isn't medication, it's the simple stuff. Get them sleeping well, cut back screen time, make space for real family connection, and give them a sense of purpose. Keep kids away from alcohol, weed, even CBD. Don't overuse meds, even safe ones like melatonin. Make bedtime sacred, turn off the phones. 2 hours before bed, read together, play a quiet family game. Yes, even something boring, so their body learns it's safe to rest. These boring basics sound simple, but they can change the trajectory of a child's life. If you're on a tight budget, please don't think healing is only for people with money to burn. I got through some of my darkest days on beans, frozen veggies, and eggs. Healing doesn't have to be expensive. And if you've been stuck in the system for years, med after med, therapy after therapy, and you feel hopeless, hear me, you are not broken. Sometimes it's not about trying harder. It's about trying differently, looking at your brain through a metabolic lens. Supporting it with food, sleep, movement, nervous system regulation might finally give it the energy it's been missing all along. If you're standing where I once stood, staring at the edge, wondering if life will ever feel worth it, please, don't write the ending yet. Start small. One choice, one safe step forward, one person you can reach out to. Give yourself 7 more days to see what could change. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or beyond saving, you're not alone. This channel, The Truth MD, isn't just about me sharing science. It's about building a place where stories like yours are seen, where hope feels real. Hit subscribe if you want to stick around. Not for me, but for the people searching at 3 a.m. for a reason to stay alive. Share your story in the comments You have no idea who you might save just by speaking up. You are not broken. Your brain can heal. And your story might be the light that keeps someone else here one more day.